Hello, welcome back to the YouTube. Today I'm going to be doing something that I think is going to be hopefully useful and informative, which is I'm going to be going back through my old portfolio that I had when I entered the industry and explaining what worked and didn't work. For those of you that have been following me for a while, I think there are a few people who've been following me for quite a few years now. You might have seen a lot of this stuff before, but the newer people, because the majority of my following is from the last year or two, there's probably a lot of stuff here that you haven't. And obviously what I have up here on the screen is my portfolio today, which is what I wanted to start with, because looking here today, you can see some of my older stuff that ultimately I've kind of, as I've gone over the years, I've taken stuff out, I've added things, I've removed things, because with your overall work portfolio, you want to keep it as representative of your, real skill set as you possibly can. If you want to see all of my old work, you can go onto my Instagram and scroll down. I don't think I've ever removed anything that I've posted on there pretty much. So all of my work is on there if you want to see it over the years and see how I've evolved. But we're gonna take it back. We're gonna take it back away from modern professional Daniel to Daniel who was at university trying to get a job. So we're going the whole way back to start off with to 2020. So yeah, 2020, 6 years ago, 5 likes. Brutal. So this is just what I wanted to show you, because I wanted to also show in this kind of like video how my understanding of portfolios overall developed and how some things kept and stayed, but also how much I improved over a very short amount of time, because I think that was very important in me getting a job in the industry. I was just producing a hell of a lot of work essentially. So in 2020, this is roughly what my portfolio looked like. A lot of development sketches that you can see, pretty messy. I think you can probably see, some semblance of my style today coming in. This is work that I produced for these like architectural buildings. Still pretty big fan of this actually. I think it's quite cute design. Some more architectural stuff. Food store, which, you might see some resemblance between this and that, because this is essentially a modern version of this design. Some little prop call outs, which I think were very successful for the time. Cargo vessels, stuff like this. So a lot of line art, really starting to figure out, like I didn't really know anything about keyframing at the time or 3D. So I think this was like some 3D cubes with photo bash over them. But again, you can see it's very, very loose. This is one of my first times doing photo bash. Very difficult as well. And then some other projects like this. This was a project based on like a sinking island. Again, like some of the inherent ideas here aren't that bad. But it's important to note, when I was producing this portfolio, I would say I was starting to get some level of interest in my work, but nobody was offering me jobs at this point. And it wasn't until a full year after this where I started to actually get offers for work. So there's this. Is there anything else there? Oh, thank you. You got to end your, whenever you send a portfolio to someone, you got to put a big thank you at the end. Maybe with a slightly nicer font choice. But yeah, you can see that there's quite a lot of improvement even within this. And I think this was all done within about 6 months. So, if you compare this keyframe here to like, this keyframe or even this keyframe, these were all made within months of each other. So you can see like a pretty dramatic improvement over time. And that improvement continued the whole way into 2021, which is when I, like I said, actually started to get work offers. So I'm going to go through all the different pieces now that actually made up my portfolio. I don't have the actual document, unfortunately, that I sent in to companies at the time, but you will see essentially all of it laid out here on ArtStation. Oh, and I don't think I've shown this yet, but I have the ability to draw on stuff in Chrome, which I find very exciting. So I can be like, look at this, isn't that great? I think that's awesome. Maybe I will be more excited for this than other people. But yeah, this is the first part of my portfolio. So at the time, I started doing some CGMA courses because I realized essentially I had like very minimal learning opportunities with the people in the city I lived in at the time, which was London. I didn't know any concept artists. I didn't know anybody who knew about the industry. So I was like, well, okay, what's an affordable way I can do this? And I went and applied for a bunch of CGMA courses. And this is one of the first ones I did, which was Aaron Lemonix. Really good teacher, and highly recommend this course. But this, I think, was where I really started to learn the process that I use today. Because when I first started working on the course with Aaron, I was doing all 2D sketching stuff. And you can see, like, again, maybe some semblance to the kind of line art that I do today. but doing a lot of iteration, a lot of sketching. Again, similar thing here, like trying to sketch a lot, draw stuff in perspective, blah, blah, blah. But I didn't really, at this point, understand how to use 3D. And Aaron was an enormous help for me because he was literally the first artist I met who said, hey, you should use 3D. And I'll show you actually specifically the one that he really helped me out with. But as you can see here, like this is a very early version of me trying to figure out Gravity Sketch. I kind of think, today I don't really show 3D callouts of stuff that I do, but I think at the time it was probably useful because a lot of the companies I was applying for really wanted 3D, specifically ILM, because 3D is incredibly important in the film industry for usage. So it was quite good for me to show this because I wanted to really demonstrate to people like, hey, I am using 3D. I know how to use 3D, even if it's really messy. I mean, this is like so funny as well, like to look at, this skull here and be like, it's such a comical way to build it in 3D. I could have just, I don't think Sketchfab was quite as available as it is now, but, today I would just download a skull from Sketchfab and move on. But yeah, this was one of the first ones where I started using 3D seriously, and you can see that I had not learned how to integrate it yet. So we have like, bits of 3D that are like literally hanging off the wall, like there's bits of geometry sticking out. We've got like, I don't know what the fuck this like square light effect is meant to be. But it was the first kind of introduction I ever had to understanding like, hey, 3D is actually really useful. Like, look how much the lighting is done for me. Look how much mood I can do. Look how many experiments I can do. That was another great thing. I got to do loads of visual experiments with this area to figure out what it was I wanted. So incredibly informative moment in my career, but also one of the things that then, started to, I think, really speed up my production because suddenly I was like, oh man, I can use, all these things I can do with 3D. I was suddenly experimenting a lot more and making a lot more stuff. And as well, just to say, like, you can see, I showed you that thing before, the portfolio that had 5 likes. We already went to like 400, just by making a slightly cooler image. I don't know today. I feel like, maybe the quality of 3D has gone up a lot, but at the time this wasn't too bad. And I remember people liking it. But yeah, I don't know, maybe things have changed. But this was an image that really got a lot of attention for me, which was awesome. So again, this is with Aaron Lemonic, and this is the image where he really would like nail down the 3D for me and explained how it should work. So I did all of this sketching. You can see I probably have some like basic 3D block out underneath this, which I was drawing over to get the perspective. Did loads and loads of iteration and like breakouts and stuff, which I think was very useful for my portfolio because it showed that I could iterate, in separate areas and do callouts. Which is, if you're not doing this, you should be doing this. This is like an essential thing to have in any junior portfolio is callouts, breakdowns, and iterations. But we got to this stage, and this was pretty groundbreaking for me because at this stage, this is still a sketch that I've drawn over some basic 3D, and then I photo bashed a bit of rocks on, and then I've started doing the lighting in 2D. And I was having a really difficult time with it. And Aaron, and again, enormous credit to, I think, a lot of my development in my career to Aaron Lemonic. He just said to me, he was like, why are you doing this? I was like, what do you mean? I was like, I'm trying to paint, I'm trying to be a concept artist. He's like, no, everybody just uses 3D these days. And I didn't realize that, I thought everybody was hand painting everything. And I was like, but what about you? He's like, yeah, I use 3D too. Everybody uses 3D. And the second I understood that, suddenly I was like, oh, holy shit. Like, so everybody's doing this. So I'm, by painting everything by hand, I'm not even using the professional process that everybody else is doing. And so that's what led to this, which again, if you look at this, yes, it does have, some slightly janky 3D elements. It's got weird repeating textures, some of the 3D over, I guess, like, over here, like this area of photo bash is getting really messy as it is, same here. But it's suddenly, like, again, compared to the other stuff that I was producing at the time, it's so much more cinematic. It's got a good camera angle. The lighting is suddenly accurate, which makes an enormous difference, right? Because accurate lighting, I think, is one of the most important things that 3D offers, because inaccurate lighting looks so unrealistic. But the second you have all the lighting done in 3D, oh my God, it just looks comparatively amazing. And so even though there's lots of messy stuff in this, again, this was actually the first time. So when I produced this image, which was, I guess, in mid 2021 or 2020. No, it must have been in late 2020. I probably made this. But when I did this, I actually started getting offers to do internships and stuff. And I started getting people reaching out to me for freelance work for the first time. Very, very underpaid freelance work, but freelance work nonetheless. So this was incredibly exciting. And again, this really triggered a lot of my development. And that's where we kind of get into here. So this was a image that I produced with Noax. So Noax, if you guys don't know, is an incredible vehicle designer. And through a friend of a friend, I managed to get onto a mentorship course that he was doing back in 2020. So at the time, I was, insanely psyched. I was like, oh my god, this guy's an amazing artist. He still is an amazing artist, just to clarify. And I had a really great time learning from him. I think I made a bit of a stupid mistake. He is a really famous vehicle designer, but at the time I was very invested in learning about environment art. So I insisted on doing an environment with him. Probably should have done more vehicles, but there you go. But anyway, this was really useful. Here's a really great thing that I learned from Alex doing this. I was working on 1,000 pixel things. So everything that I was doing was really low res. And Alex was the first person who ever said to me, he was like, yeah, you should render in 4K so that you have high quality renders. He was like, what's the point of rendering something in low res? And I was like, oh shit. Nobody had ever told that to me. And again, I think that's the case as I show a lot of these things that I developed with the help of a lot of people is I'll be going saying things that might be obvious to you, but at the time to me were incredibly, groundbreaking news to be hearing. I was like, holy shit, I should render stuff at high resolution. So yeah, this was a really interesting project. This was also, I think that the great thing that Alex did for me was, number one, he really helped me figure out this architecture a lot better. I was doing a lot of this in 3D Coat, which I don't really use anymore. But he was, kind of explaining hey, you should do isolated elements, do some shot callouts, blah, blah, blah. But the most important thing was he started to introduce me to different ways of doing, iteration. So line art iteration, photo bash iteration, sketch callouts on the side. And also shots like this. So again, credit to Alex. This is pretty much 100% his idea to do this, but I had never thought about doing multiple kind of black and white test keyframes to plan out an image. And he said, well, Eitan Zana does this, so why don't you do this if that's the kind of job you want? Again, probably obvious to a lot of people, but totally groundbreaking to me. I was like, holy shit, that's, an incredible insight. So I built all of this in 3D, and then I started doing these callouts, and again, just incredibly useful and so cool to get to do this. And you can see that I'm starting to paint more into my work as well. I'm starting to figure out photo bashing. And that's how we got to this image, which again, for me at the time, getting 1,600 likes was crazy. And I think the reason that this work got a lot of likes at the time, and again, maybe it wouldn't now. I don't know. It's hard to say the industry then versus the industry now. But I think the thing that works about this is that everything comes into this focal point, and the focal point is pretty well figured out. So within this focal point, we've got a lot of photo bash, pretty much all of the walls here. This is all photo bash. I would definitely do this in 3D now because it would take so little time to do correctly. But this is all photo bash. And I have some nice textures on here. That's a nice texture here too. But yeah, it's pretty well thought out, and it essentially it guides your eye there in a really, really, really strong way, right? Your eye is just pushed straight into the center. And I think the advantage of this is it totally hides the fact, maybe not totally, but it helps hide the fact of how terrible some of the photo bash I'm doing over here is. Look at this bloody rendering of the shadow on the ground. Look at the oh god, it's just so bad. Look at the rocks are changing direction constantly. There's horrible paint over here in the background. I mean, again, I hate to point out things that are bad in my own art, but all of this is so low resolution. This is a 4K image. And this background image must be 300 pixels. And for some reason, I chose to put that in there with no paint over. I'm going to talk about this more as well later. I'm probably going to point this out in a few of my other pieces, but like sharp lines in the photo bash is so bad as well. Like this does not look natural, right, whatsoever. So there's a lot of problems here, but I think that strong composition that pulls your eye and that guides you into the center really, really helps. And again, this is one of those things where I had never done 3D to this extent. So even though I didn't do this whole wall, doing all of the 3D here and for these background things was a big learning experience. Doing a proper design process was a big learning experience. And, learning how to make use of my renders, learning, hey, yeah, I should render this at high resolution because otherwise what's the point, was a big, big learning thing. And as well, just something else to say here, like all of the work that I'm showing, I was doing on a MacBook. So a lot of the kind of like, when I'm saying like, hey, I would, build this in 3D now, I would put these characters in 3D. I'd probably build all of this in 3D now and then photo bash over to improve it. But the reason I wasn't doing that was partially because I wasn't able to, because I was using a MacBook. So I had to be really, really careful with what I was rendering. I remember when Alex told me, hey, you should render this in 4K. It took me 15 hours to render this. And again, we're literally pretty much just rendering this central area, nothing else. So really big learning opportunity for me. But also I look back on this and I'm like, I could do this so much better now. I guess that's and you should look back on any piece of work and say, I could do it better now. But yeah, that moves us on to this one. So again, this is another really interesting one. This one was produced mostly under my own steam. I think my friend Reese Griffiths might have helped me a little bit on this one. But this was, again, another really important project because this is where I'm getting even more into 3D and also really starting to learn how to integrate photographs into things. So I'm just going to go down into the development stuff down here. So I'm going to come back to that in a sec. So I was building a lot of this in 3D. So you can see I was building like sets in Gravity Sketch. So I was really, really into Gravity Sketch at the time. Again, learning from what I built up in the previous thing and starting to do some, call outs and door designs and, here's what the street could look like, blah, blah, blah. Starting to do some sketches. Now, again, I think a lot of these are way too stylized. Like I actually kind of think this sketch here on the left-hand side is really cool, but it's really, really fucking stylized, right? This doesn't look very filmic. And obviously at this point, I was really, really trying to get into the film industry. But this is not very filmic. This looks more like Spider-Verse than Spider-Man, right? So still experimenting, still not quite understanding stuff, doing some sketches like this. Like I really like this sketch still today. I think that's actually one that starts to look effective and cinematic and the things that we want to do. Call outs of the bar, iterations, again, pretty messy, but showing that I have the capability to think through different options and then building 3D assets. This was pretty important. So I actually want to talk about this because you'll see this in another project as well. One important thing that I learned fairly early on was if I'm going to build a scene in 3D, I should, number one, try and build as much of it as possible myself. And number two, try to show it off to show what's built by me and what isn't built by me. Now, the reason that's really important is because today, Kitbash has come along, and Kitbash was still around when I was doing this project too, but not that many people were using it comparative to now, especially not students, because most of us couldn't afford it. But Kitbash was coming along. We were all kind of, I guess, like some of us were using it a little bit. I wasn't using it that much. But the thing was, you had to show like, your 3D ability, what can you actually do in 3D? And so creating call out sheets like this, where I was like, if I was in interviews and they say, oh, okay, this is like, so use 3D. And then I could go, yeah, I use 3D and I made all of that. So if we're on a production, I can make custom assets, was very important, I think. And I think today, a lot of the time I look at students' portfolios and I see images which are either entirely built out of Kitbash or look like they're built out of Kitbash, if that makes sense. So there aren't any unique assets in there that really tell me like this person's put thought into their design. Now, I don't think there's a lot of stuff in here that would tell you, hey, this is really unique. But at least showing it off here demonstrates, okay, this guy can build some 3D. And again, like putting it all in a scene like this where I can say, this is a 100% custom scene. You know, if somebody gave this to me now as a piece of 3D, I could light this and make it look very good very quickly. You know, this is more than good enough quality 3D to put into a keyframe. So I think that was quite important too, because, you know, a lot of the time companies are looking for somebody with potential, right? Which does help. But they're also sometimes looking for somebody who like won't fuck up too bad, if that makes sense. And I think the reason this was good was because I could essentially show this to a company and be like, you know, even if I fuck up the keyframe, you'll still have the 3D, you know, at least you can fix it afterwards, if that makes sense. But yeah, so doing a little bit of 3D like this and then doing the keyframes. Now, again, these keyframes were a really big learning like thing for me. I actually did these in a really interesting way. So this is my younger brother, Zach, who's a fashion designer. And I pretty much got this is my dad and this is my brother, and I got my dad and my brother to pose for me because I had seen that I think one of the Naughty Dog guys, he was making like custom photo bash for all of his scenes. And one of the things, if you look at a lot of my other stuff, is I wasn't very good at putting in characters at this point. You know, this character is very badly integrated, and you'll see some other stuff which wasn't so good either. But essentially, I was just like, man, if I can just get the exact photograph I need and match it up in 3D, then it doesn't matter anymore. It will look good. And so that's essentially what I did. And by the way, I don't think this is like cheating or anything, because I think I remember one of my friends talking to me about it, and they were like, yeah, but what happens if you're on a production? Like, you can't do this. And I was like, yeah, I agree. But, you know, so many people's portfolios, especially today, again, with the prevalence of kitbash, they have characters in them which they also can't really reuse, because it's a character that they've paid for that's in like a particular pose. And it also won't reapply to a lot of projects, if that makes sense. So I kind of thought, well, I'm just going to do something that looks good, and to show off my, you know, in a way to show off the vision of what I was trying to do, because I wasn't that good at doing characters. So what I did was I made all the scenes in 3D. I planned out where the characters should be. And, you know, you can kind of see that here as well with these gravity sketch shots where I was planning out in VR where the camera should roughly be. And then I made my brother and my dad stand around, you know, walking under similar lighting conditions so that I could photograph them with my iPhone. So this one down at the bottom, that's my dad here on the left. That's my mum here. And that's my brother getting shot. And you can see it's pretty, there's a little bit of photo bash and moving them around, but it's pretty bloody similar to what we have here, which is great because it meant that suddenly I had these, again, really accurate images that I could put into my accurate 3D to tell a cool story, which was great. And, you know, I think a lot of these images came out really effectively because of that. Some of them are definitely not as good. But yeah, like, you know, an image like this, I think, was really useful because it showed that I could integrate a photo bash into a scene roughly. I mean, this is still like super rough and very painterly compared to what I do now, but, you know, nonetheless. Integrate a character into a scene, come up with cool lighting, come up with a cool story and narrative, etc., etc. And you know, here's my brother on the toilet. And of course, you know, the main selling point of this was probably this first image where we have, you know, multiple characters and some interesting lighting and stuff like that. So yeah, pretty happy with this project actually, retrospectively. And maybe I'll try and you know, integrate this into one of my new things. But yeah, very useful one again, and big learning opportunity. This was a really big one for me. So this was a project, again, that I did on CGMA. Some people have accused me in the past of being sponsored by CGMA. I'm not. If anybody wants to sponsor me, though, I will take your money and chill. But again, this was an enormous learning opportunity for me. I was working with Ricardo Lima on CGMA. I was taking his keyframe course, which I still think he does, by the way, if you want to go and learn from him. He's an incredibly good artist. And this was awesome because for Ricardo's course, he kind of recommended that, you know, hey, we're going to be learning about keyframing, so maybe try and pick like a more realistic subject matter. You don't necessarily have to do some crazy sci-fi design, you know, pick like a understandable normal story. And so I chose to do like a submarine kind of explosion. And this was where, for the example, I first learned about doing characters in 3D. This is where I learned about DAZ, which I still use to this day. And where I started to understand, hey, you know, this is how you integrate things together. So in these images, you're going to see a lot more 3D, but you're also going to see a lot more photo bash that's actually successfully integrated into that 3D, and characters which are blends of, you know, like this guy, Photobash, 3D, paint over, etc., etc. So the skill set is starting to come together. You know, I think there's flashes of high skill work in the other stuff, but I think this is where it's starting to get a little bit better and more obvious. So pretty basic story. Just having a drink of my coffee, sorry. Submarine, big boom. Again, you know, I'm just looking, man. If I could actually just like give one bit of advice, don't do this. Don't put like random sharp edges in your paintings. At the very least, blur it out with some Gaussian blur. Paint over it. These sharp edges are so fucking unnatural. And I know this is like a slightly sidelined thing, but this is like one of the biggest things where if I painted all of this out of these images, they would instantaneously be so much better. And I don't know why it is, but it's just these things make work look so amateur. So amateur. But anyway, that's a very, very sidetracked thing. But let's just get back to it. So yeah, submarine explodes. These guys are like, what the hell? And then the submarine is flooding. And then this guy's in the fire. And then there were some more images, but I cut them from this a while ago. So here's the other thing that's really important to know. So in this image, you can see this is 100% Photobash paint over and stuff like this. At a certain point, you can see that I started to add in some effects here like this. So this is ActViz, which I've spoken about in the past in other YouTube videos. And the other thing that I've said in YouTube videos whenever I've mentioned this is I used to really overuse it. And this is a pretty fucking good example of me overusing it. Now, why do I think it doesn't matter here so much? Well, because to be honest, at the time, I was not a good enough painter to have an alternative, you know? So this adds like a lot of nice noise to the image. You know, it kind of, you know, makes the smoke look better, and it gets rid of all of those, like I was saying, those really sharp, horrible edges that you have here. Running ActViz over the top of this would have got rid of those disgusting edges. So suddenly you're starting to see this. And again, this is something that's used a lot in the film industry to get images out quickly. So I think the fact that I was using this a little bit kind of like helped with the visualization of the work. Using it here, I was really happy with this image. Again, it's so painful to see, but see these fucking horrible sharp edges in the water? Disgusting. But other than that, pretty cool image, I think. And again, here's the other thing that's improving, by the way, as we go through these. Like, if we go the whole way back to this project, the images are, you know, number one, technically. And again, by the way, this is like, you know, we're less than a year apart here. I think this might be like, this is like probably 6, 7, 8 months in between here and here. It's not a long time, you know, max a year. So like pretty fast improvement because I was doing so much work at the time. But beyond the fact that this is badly integrated and, you know, the Photobash is bad, it's not a cinematic comp. You know, it's not cinematic. It doesn't look, the lighting isn't cinematic, all this other stuff. That's where we start to get, you know, when we're looking at this or when we're looking at this, like this is a pretty good precursor to this, right? Like it wasn't just about the fact that like technically my ability to paint, my ability to understand exposure, my ability to use 3D was improving. It was also the fact that my ability to make a cool cinematic image that gave off a feeling more than, you know, you just look at it and go, oh, that's concept art. That was really cool. And I think this is the thing, you know, like this image is a perfect example of that. Like it's a these two very cinematic, very emphatic, kind of like heavy feeling images. And also a lot of this came down to the fact, by the way, that I was just looking at a lot more fucking references. I barely ever look at references. It's one of my biggest problems actually as a concept artist, even today. I like to just come up with stuff by myself because I'm stupid. But looking at references was an enormous help because suddenly I was like, oh, you know, is it Richard Deakins? Roger Deakins, maybe? The director of photography. It's like, oh, he does stuff like this, and oh, George Lucas frames this like this, and you know, being able to copy that stuff over and transfer it into the images to get some emotional quality into them was such a massive game changer. And again, here you can see like some of the 3D that I'm using for these scenes. Again, very useful. It's crazy as well to me. Like I look at something like this and I'm like, wow, with like like a tiny bit of extra knowledge, this would have been so much further along, you know, with like modern, you know, the way that I understand 3D now. Rough paint overs to show like how I was thinking about the images. These are the ones I cut out, by the way. So I had finished versions of all of these, but they're not in there. black and white variations, sketch variations of different frames. Again, not only is there a lot of work there, but it shows an ability to draw. It shows an ability to frame, to tell a story, to draw things from different angles, to, vary stuff up. I think it's very clear when you look at, I mean, that's actually a pretty cool image, that one. I should have done that. But yeah, when you look at like a lot of these, the important thing to note is that I'm showing off a variety of skills. So I'm showing off that I can photo bash, that I can use 3D, that I can do color, kind of like color frames, that I can do drawings. And of course, like I said, that I can do 3D, which was incredibly important for me at the time to show people that I could do it. So this was a kit bash set that I built for myself just for this project. So you can still get this on Gumroad, by the way, if you think any of these assets will be useful to you. But being able to show this and just going like, yeah, I made everything in that was a big thing, because, today, I think if I saw somebody designing something like this, I would probably presume it was kit bash. But if you come to me and say, I built everything myself actually, and show a clean sheet of, 3D models that you did, big kind of like, I think, up for your portfolio. So that brings us to here. So I think I might actually have to rearrange this ever so slightly. So while I was doing all this stuff, I was at university. And for those of you that don't know, I studied graphic design at university. So I was not actively being taught this stuff, except on like the CGMA classes I was trying to take on in my own time. And one of the big problems was at my university, they didn't think that concept art counted as art. So just to explain this very briefly, but I had a bit of a problem with my graphic design school, because I went onto the course because it was a very broad visual design course. So you did filmmaking, you did animation, you did all these things. And so I presumed as well, I was like, well, if we're doing filmmaking on this course, they're going to be happy for me to do concept art, which is a big part of modern filmmaking. But they were incredibly resistant. And it was only in my final year of the university that I managed to convince them to let me do concept art for my final project. And to be honest, they actually said that I couldn't do it. And I just said, well, I'm going to do it. So this is where we ended up, and so this was these three pieces are the combined project that I produced, essentially across my final, I think, 6 months at university. So I was doing all of this, and I was doing a CGMA course, I think at the time. It might have been this Ricardo Lima one. So I was doing all of this simultaneously. And this is what I managed to produce. So the first thing was, essentially, when I was coming towards this, because, I mean, maybe this is useful advice for anybody else doing a final major project, or if you want to design a big project for yourself, that this is useful advice. I decided what I wanted to do was to prioritize variety and keyframes. So keyframes were a big deal because I wanted to apply to ILM and work in the film industry. But I also wanted to ensure I had a nice variety of design language inside of it, that I could show off a variety of different, like situations and biomes to get high diversity there. And to try and keep all of it pretty much at as high a skill level as I could. You can see here as well, by the way, because I don't think I had like processed all of the information in my brain yet, I'm not using ActViz on some of this, which I probably should have. I mean, this background would look so much better if I'd just done a quick pass of ActViz over. But yeah, this is me trying to photo bash and use 3D to make something. I think the ground is actually a Quixel asset. This was like, I just learned about Quixel, I think, when I was making this. But this was a great image for me because I think it created what is my modern day design process. This is pretty much, if you look at a lot of my design work today, or especially my professional stuff, this is how a lot of it is laid out, which is I will do a final 3D render like this. I will do some variations like this, and I'll do some higher, like more wide variations like this. So starting off doing like line art sketches, which again, look at not to pat myself on the back here, but look at the quality improvement between these sketches and, this. That is such an enormous difference. So, you can see, because obviously there's a lot of also practice that is not in my portfolio. But yeah, the quality of the 3D, enormous improvement. This is when I learned how to use Blender properly and started using heavy poly config by Vaughan Ling, which I really recommend. So yeah, just big improvement all around. Put a lot of effort into this, created this, and produced the keyframe. But as well as this, I also learned to do something else. I learned how to do some character design. So I'd done some character design in my own time in previous projects. It wasn't a big part of my portfolio, but I wanted to show, hey, I can do stuff like this. And again, just look at the final rendering. The quality difference between this and what I was producing before is insane. And I even, learned how to do like characters. So I was rather than, again, there's no kit bash in here. I probably would kit bash this character together now if I was doing it. But I literally made all of this in Gravity Sketch. So I was, I think some of this, I think like maybe the trousers are like a cloth sim in Blender, and then the jacket was a Gravity Sketch thing I hand put together with I can't remember what the tool is called, the stroke tool, I think, in Gravity Sketch, and then I would photo bash on the face to create the final thing. And I think these sketches are probably way cooler than the final renders, but I wanted to show that I could also do the final render. Here's this like little monkey character, kind of like Rocket, from Guardians of the Galaxy, but he's a monkey. Same thing. Variations, sketches, final. I wanted to show I could do mechanical design. Again, this with a little bit of extra effort in there could be so much better. But again, variations, final sketch, final design, and this is like an engineer character, same. So, this is the thing, is like when I look at a lot of modern portfolios, and I do think, would I get a job today? I'm not sure. I would like to think I would. Obviously, if I was studying today, there'd be a lot of different resources at my disposal as well, so my portfolio would probably look very different. But I think the thing that makes this project like feel good and work was the fact that it had a lot of development work in it. The actual final, products is one keyframe and, 4 final renders here of characters. But it's all of the development that makes it worthwhile and demonstrates to people, that I have a valuable skill set. So I think that's what really made this all mega useful. Then I went on to produce some keyframes using these characters. And again, I'm using a lot more 3D. You can see I've got a crashed version of the ship here. I'm designing other stuff. And really I was doing these, so I did 2 episodes, that's what I called them. So this was my, Wildlands was the name of the project, and I did episode 1 and episode 2, which we'll get to. But the idea was, I wanted to show like, again, high variety. So episode 1 is like this war-torn kind of scary landscape, and this other one is a much more kind of like flourishing, beautiful place. And again, why did I choose these 2 things? Well, because from my analysis at the time, if you looked at a lot of the shows, there were 2 things. You either had on like, stuff like Star Wars, you had like really beautiful biomes, or you had kind of like moody, war-ravaged kind of things. So I was like, well, I'll go after the common kind of stuff that people in the industry also do. Again, look at... What the fuck? What was I doing? Just photo bash that in, Daniel. Idiot. What a moron. But anyway, yeah, lots of improvement here again, going for a lot more of like a strong, striking kind of like value structure that I think is quite cool. Designing the vehicle itself is really useful. Showing I can do some architectural design. Again, could be so much better, but it is what it is. Showing I could do an action shot using those photo bashing skills that I developed from the other project. Doing kind of like a more solemn kind of image. With some sci-fi elements, and then of course doing all of the iteration that comes with it usually, and doing all this stuff too. And again, I think I'm gonna probably mention this at the end, but the thing with a lot of the work that I'm showing you guys here is that it's not too amazing. I think it's good enough to get work, to be honest, but it's not crazy, and it has a lot of cracks in it. That's the way I would describe it. I think a lot of these images are really close, especially the final images here. They're really close to actually being really good keyframes, but there's just, things missing, like not understanding proper integration, not understanding that I should have photo bashed in the sky, right? Not understanding how to make, these flames from the sky looking good, etc., etc. And all of that stuff is missing, but it's not so much work to teach that stuff, right? Teaching somebody, hey, here's how you do better integration. Here's how, you should photo bash that background instead of painting it, isn't that much work. And so I think, it's the portfolio was showing off the potential of like, okay, with minimal mentoring, this person can get to a level where they're going to be very professional. And again, here's the second part of this. I really like this image still, even if it does have these horrible cut lines that we've been talking about everywhere else, but I really like the design of this. And then you can kind of see as we get here, this is probably my favorite image that I produced from this time period. Probably one of my most successful ones as well. yeah, it's cool. Again, horrible cut lines, horrible painting, horrible integration, but pretty good. And again, when you look at this and you're like, okay, that's where we were a year ago, probably less than a year ago. That's where we are now. You can't complain about, that kind of movement forward. Using the ship, showing the characters, having a conversation, again, I was very actively trying to change the type of shot. So like I'd say like, okay, I'm going to do a medium shot, then I'm going to do an establishing shot, then I'll do a medium, then I'll do an interior shot, then I'll do like a creature shot. There were some other shots in between here, but again, I got rid of them. So this is keyframe 9, that's keyframe 5, so another 3 in between. But yeah, that's my mum. Getting the whole family involved in the art creation process. But again, you can see here, like, I think this has the potential to be pretty good with some basic paint over and figuring out a little bit of the lighting more. And this, again, the same with this, and again, the same with this. So, there's another one. So yeah, I think I don't want to harp on it for too long because I've probably been talking for ages now. But I think, the gist of it is, if we look at any of these things that I produce in my portfolio, what's the structure? Development, and then polished image process. Like I'm showing how something comes together. I'm showing my thought process behind it. I'm showing lots of different ideas. I'm showing the ability to sketch cleanly, to design cleanly. And I think this was a big thing, was that I think my design skills were a lot better than a lot of my finishing skills at the time. And so I think, a lot of these designs are pretty good actually. And again, I think it's much harder to teach somebody how to design well than how to photo bash a sky, where you say, okay, go get a 4K render of the sky and stick it in the fucking background rather than doing whatever you've done here, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I think that was it. And that's pretty much the end of my portfolio, besides this little stuff, which I'll just have a quick scroll through. So this was like some of the other pieces I made during 2021. And I guess just while I like slowly go through these, all of this is the portfolio that got me my first job. So my first job was at Industrial Light and Magic as a junior artist. And the one thing that I want to say is, I have so many students who ask me, like, Daniel, how can I get into a job like this? How can I get my first job? And there's a few things of advice that I'd like to give you just while I go through these last little few images here, which is, number one, whatever it is that you're producing, whatever it is that you're trying to do, do not get so obsessed with it that it's going to really upset you if you don't get it. I think it's really, really good to aim for a difficult company to get into, like ILM, but you also have to understand, I don't think I understood this at the time, but you also have to understand that it's not a given, There aren't that many job opportunities for those kind of companies. They're very small, tight-knit teams. So whatever company that you're aiming for, make sure that you're also aiming for other places too, which, by the way, is why I did all of the development work and did other things, because I knew that obviously a lot of my stuff was quite filmic and film specific, but by doing these development stuff, it meant that game companies could also be interested in me, and I did get offers from game companies at the same time that I was applying to ILM. So, you can get a variety of work by showing off a variety of work, which is incredibly important. The other thing is, understand the professional processes that people have. One of the biggest differences between me in 2020, the whole way back here, and me in 2021 here, and again, like, come on, look at this to this. I not to big myself up, but I rarely see that level of improvement in students today. But like, why did I improve so much? Well, not only because I produced a shit ton of work, but also because I started to understand how people were producing work. I didn't fucking understand how people were making concept art. I didn't understand people using 3D. I didn't understand how to photo bash. And a lot of it I had to brute force, but also meeting people who taught me that stuff made an enormous difference. So if you're watching this today and you're like, hey, I want to work at those companies, I want to do stuff, this is, and you don't know 3D and you're going, oh, I don't know if I want to learn it. If you want to work in the film industry, if you want to work in AAA, this is your signal to go and learn this stuff. It makes a big difference. And not only will it help you get a job, it will also make you a better painter and a better artist, because suddenly, rather than drawing everything inaccurately and having like half a reference, you will have perfect lighting every time, and you will start to learn what good lighting looks like. 3D allows for more experimentation. It allows for more camera movement. It allows for like set builds that change things. It's an incredibly useful tool, not only for making work, but for learning. So if you haven't learned it yet, please, please, please do. And I guess the other thing is, I think a lot of people, me included, when we're joining the industry, we like to think that, someone's going to take a chance on us. They're going to see the potential and be like, yeah, this kid's good. I'm going to give them a shot and get them in the industry. I was incredibly fucking lucky that the people at ILM, Jason Hawley, Stephen Tappan, gave me a shot. And I'd like to think that it worked out. I think I was a pretty decent employee for my time there. But, the reason I think that it worked out was because I didn't stop. I was producing so much work before I joined, and I was producing so much work after I joined as well. I was just constantly making to try and get to the skill level that I needed to be at. And I don't think I would be even a quarter as good as I am today if I hadn't done that. So you need people to take chances on you. Yes, that is essentially what a junior job is essentially somebody going, yeah, I think you can probably do okay. But you also need to put in enough effort to demonstrate that you're worth the risk, because that's essentially what somebody's doing, right? When they're hiring you for something, is they're taking a risk to presume that either you will be good enough or that they can train you to be good enough to get stuff done. So all of this stuff, that I'm showing you, all these different images that I'm flicking through on Chrome here, all these different things, some of it's bad. This is not good. But the fact that this was in my portfolio, and then a few months later, stuff like this was in my portfolio, that showed that I was worth the risk in a way, I think, because it showed that I was capable of rapid learning and development. And the only way that you will be able to show somebody that you're capable of rapid learning and development is by rapidly producing work and trying your best to develop. And that can be very, very frustrating. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes you will have months at a time where you will not improve at all. But eventually, if you keep on going, I think you will end up with work like mine, or potentially even better than mine. In fact, I hope that you make work even better than mine, because learning in art, if you are engaging with the proper principles, the proper ideas, the proper mentality, it's a very linear process in many ways, I think. If you are going to people, asking for advice, and you're earnestly trying, then you will improve. It's impossible not to improve. Even if you feel like you're not improving, you are improving. So if you're somebody who's been in a bit of a slump for however long, or you're feeling burnt out and you still want to apply into this industry, I say this to people all the time because this is what I did. I was told when I was I guess I was getting so off-piste, but whatever. When I was at my first year of university, I told somebody I wanted to be a concept artist, and they said to me, they were like, oh yeah, that's a really difficult job to get. I think you should choose something else. And I was like, oh damn, that's a crazy thing to say to a student. But I kind of took that to heart on some level, and I accepted as well that it was a very hard job to get. And the fact that it was a lot of work, it took a lot of time to get into the industry. But the reason I say that you kind of should take that to heart is because you can spend 5, 6, 7 years slowly producing a portfolio that can get you in, or you can really just, work incredibly hard, try to get it out as quickly as possible, contact as many people as possible, do as much networking as possible, and just work incredibly hard for 1 or 2 years. And whilst that's a very, very difficult thing to do, and it's 100% easier said than done, right? When I'm oh, you should just work hard. This is not quite what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is, in my opinion, it's better to work really hard for 2 years than to work kind of hard for 7. For me personally, I'd rather get it out of the way, if that makes sense. I would rather just get through it, make the work, try and get into the industry, and then move on and improve past that point. Because that was the mentality I had, where I was okay, I'm just going to try and absolutely burn out and give this everything I've got. Also because at the end of the day, I think it's... for me, at least, the way that I always saw things, I was it's easier to look myself in the mirror every morning if I get rejected from the job that I've always wanted, but I know that there's nothing else I could have done, rather than to get rejected and go, oh, fuck, what if I'd spent, what if I'd done one more project? What if I'd done this? What if I'd done that? That, to me, is a lot more brutal than just getting rejected. So yeah, I hope this was useful. It's a very, I think strange overview of my career and, how I got into my job. And I think, again, just to re-clarify this, the thing to understand is that what you're seeing here is probably about 8 months of work, because I was reproducing my portfolio so often. And again, if you want to go and see the other stuff that I was producing at the time, go check out my Instagram and just scroll down and you will see everything that I was making, because it's a lot. So yeah, I hope that's been useful for some people. Obviously, the industry has changed a lot over the last 5 years. Maybe even, I guess I posted this 4 years ago. Damn. 4 years, 5 years, who knows anymore? It's all a blur. But anyway, the industry has changed a lot since 2021, which is when I started working. Oh, wait, okay. Well, there's definitely 4 years. What the fuck am I talking about? Anyway, whatever. Some of this stuff is 5 years old. But the industry has changed a lot since 2021. 3D has become even more prominent than it was. Kit bashing has become more prominent. I think the quality expectations have gone up. But I will also say, I think a lot of the stuff that I was doing in my portfolio here is still applicable today. And again, that's mainly the iterations, the diversification, the trying different subject matters, the, moving into things that make you uncomfortable and trying out different things. That all matters a lot still today. So yeah, I hope this has been useful. I hope it's been somewhat inspirational, maybe also an insight into the industry a few years ago. And yeah, if you guys like the video, please give it a like and subscribe. And there's also a Discord called Sketchpit, which I run with my friend Ruben, which will be linked below. And again, check out my socials, ArtStation, Instagram. Follows are very appreciated. The more followers I get, the more my narcissism goes up. So, if you want to see me become more narcissistic, give me a follow. It's worth it. You think about the funny things I'll do. It'll be great. Yeah, cool. Thank you so much, guys. And I will see you all soon. Bye-bye.